But how are unemployed, and often sometimes people would say virtually unemployable, at least in the short term, Aboriginal families going to cope with housing from the market rather from the I guess the sheltered workshop model?
You've got to have systems in place to so that these people can cope with it. I mean, if you have a look at the systems that we grew up in, we had a system where there was 3 stages of moving inside good housing, and it was made, if you had the ability to look after the 1-bedroom house, then you got a 2-bedroom house. And I think that opportunity has to be given to these people, and they can change. You've seen over long periods of time people change, people's attitudes have changed, and these people can change.
Do you think that in some ways government expects too little of Aboriginal people, doesn't expect them to... Do you know what I'm saying? That there's this expectation that they're not going to be able to come up to the mark, and that applies in housing, education, all sorts of areas.
I think the biggest luring factor to government about Indigenous people is their poverty and disadvantage, and they want to keep them there because at the end of the day, every Indigenous person that's born is born with a dollar figure to the Northern Territory government from the Commonwealth. And it's not in their best interest to have them healthy, educated, nor housed. So they're all on this gravy train of poverty and disadvantage on the backs of my people. And like I said in Parliament, the disadvantage factor and the poverty of my people determines how a lot of people live, how many houses they got, who their friends are, what kind of car they drive around in. And I've been asking myself this question over and over again in this vast electorate that I drive around in. Of McDonald, is it in their best interest to overcome poverty? No. Is it in their best interest to educate people? No.
That's a serious kind of suggestion. Do you think that is a deliberate ploy, or do you think it's an unconscious process?
I think it's a deliberate ploy, and if you have a look at the current releases that the member for Breitling has been talking about in Parliament for the last week, underspending in Indigenous areas, from the Commonwealth and the Northern Territory government, I just think it's really, really terrible that we've come to that stage in the history of this country when money that's earmarked for Indigenous disadvantage and for our Territory children are just being put into water parks and convention centres, into marginal seats in the northern suburbs, because it is the northern suburbs that elect the government.
Aren't there 2 elements? So there's the money itself, but then there's the way the money is spent, and then the welfare model, which we've been talking about, and whether no matter how much money you spend, is the welfare model going to be the model that gets people out of poverty?
The problem with an Indigenous person's life or the Indigenous communities is that if there's a huge problem, you need to have consultation. So they just go and consult, and people have just been over-consulted. It's like these people don't have common sense. It's about their own little field of expertise, that they have to feather their own nest. And the government's part of a process of saying, okay, we need you to come in and do this investigation and do more consultation on these people. And a classic example of what I'm talking about is if you have a look at the teacher assistant certificate that Aboriginal teacher assistants get, that is imprisonment in their communities for life. They cannot use that certificate to even come in and get a job as a teacher or a teacher assistant in Alice Springs. It is very much only for Indigenous communities, and that's a real sad case in the Northern Territory, that we got such certificates that does not allow these people to move around and get jobs even in Darwin or Melbourne. And it's the same with the health workers. When are these people going to become teachers? When are these people going to become nurses? And they've been training for over 20 years.